Okay, everyone, welcome. My name is Matt Flenley. I look after marketing here at Datactics. If I could ask my panelists, Peggy and Fiona, to switch their cameras on, please. We can all gaze at you lovingly and adoringly. This is actually the second in our series of webinars focusing on data, trust, security, and the impact of LLMs, certainly in the AI era. If you missed the first one, you can go into the Q&A. I posted a little link into that earlier on. And if for some reason it's decided to disappear from there, you can reach out to me afterwards and I'll send it on to you. As I say, please do link in with questions as we go through, and I'll do my best to get to them so that we can ask Peggy and Fiona as we go. So yes, firstly, let's do some welcomes and introductions. Firstly, we've got Fiona Browne, who is CTO here at Datactics. As it says there, Fiona brings over 18 years of research and industry experience and specializes in the pragmatic use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Prior to joining Datactics, Fiona worked as a lecturer in computing science at Ulster University, teaching data analytics and a research focus on applied artificial intelligence and data integration. She was also formerly a research fellow at Queen's University Belfast. Hello, Fiona.
Thanks,
secondly, we have Peggy, who is the CDO at BigID, although we're going to be campaigning for a different job title by the end of this session. Peggy has over 18 years of practitioner experience in data management, stewardship and governance across firms including Morgan Stanley, AIG and S&P Global. Peggy has a master's in information systems from New York University and a BA in economics from Cornell. She is an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon Heinz College for the CDO certification program, and welcome to you also, Peggy.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here with you and Fiona today.
Thanks. So let's get started with a poll, which I'm going to jump into Teams and launch for you both. For everybody on the call as well, hopefully this all works. You should be able to see this. So the poll that should come up says, which do you think of these presents the biggest challenge when it comes to achieving data trust and security in the AI era? This is an audience poll open to everybody. And if you as panelists can answer it as well, that'd be great. So the options here are, number one, understanding and complying with data privacy regulations. Number two, ensuring the quality and reliability of data for AI model creation. Number three is managing and securing unstructured data effectively. Four is implementing observability and trustworthiness scores for data. And five is staying ahead of evolving cybersecurity threats in AI applications. So if you could all be voting on these, I think I get to vote as well, which is rather exciting. Those results are going to be clicking in. So please do vote on that one. While I'm giving you a few more moments just to vote, I'll move on to the topic we are going to be covering today. We are focusing much more on the protection, data trust and security side of things. I actually read a post of yours the other day, Peggy, yesterday I think it was, which was looking into areas as tricky as preventing staff members from uploading PII into ChatGPT. So it's clearly a very timely and relevant session. I don't think any of us could have expected that. So let's then, without any further ado, move on to the results of the opening poll. So looking at this, we have, what have we got here? Some 11%, or sorry, 20% on complying with data privacy regulations, 60% on the quality of and reliability of data, which was what I voted for, just for openness. 10% on managing and securing unstructured data effectively. Nobody seems to be worried about observability and trustworthiness scores, so we can skip that entire section of this webinar.
Skip that question.
Yeah, we forget it. And then the 10% saying staying ahead of evolving cybersecurity threats. So maybe looking at those results, I'll go to you first, Peggy, if that's okay. What's standing out to you? And then feel free to give me a shout when you need me to move on in the slide deck.
No, absolutely. So certainly the majority of the respondents here have selected ensuring the quality and reliability of data. And I think that many of you in the audience are probably involved in the data space. They have a role in data, whether it's previously in data management, data governance, or analytics, are now evolving into AI algorithms. I think we're all concerned about the quality of that data. And even though no one chose trustworthiness, I think there is a correlation certainly with quality of data with trustworthiness. So I think that's an interesting correlation. But since folks probably only allowed to choose one, I don't blame the results, and I would agree with that as well, personally.
And same to you, Fiona. Your reflections on the poll results.
So I'll be open, and I voted for the data quality one as well. But I think it was a tricky question, because actually I wanted to hit, 3 or 4 of those. I think an important one, which we're going to get to further on in the webinar, is regulations that are coming our direction, and what that means in terms of current regulations and what's new in terms of AI regulations. But I think that concept of data, weaves its way through all of the results here as well. So there are challenges in terms of, yes, of course, the quality of your data for AI, ML, and from the input of it to the results side and monitoring. A really interesting area, and I see people have picked up on that also, is the cyber security threats. So this, again, we're at nascent stages in terms of, understanding what cybersecurity threats are to AI and the implications of that. And some threats resolve around data itself. So poisoning training data sets that are fed into models, and the implications of that. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about the data side of it and the implications of it throughout the ML lifecycle.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Fiona, and you're right. We'll get more into that as we go along. My next slide that I have to show for you is one of Peggy's, that also kind of broadens into the spaces where the challenges are with AI governance in this. And perhaps I can ask you, Peggy, just to kind of add to the conversation and a bit about your perspective on the topic today.
No, absolutely, Matt. And this is where my role as Chief Data Officer at BigID, I have the luxury of speaking to many of our customers who are, there are different points in the AI maturity, and certainly following a lot of the US developments on our AI executive order and the changing regulations, and especially in privacy, which have a AI component, a bias component, especially with the collection of private and sensitive data. It's certainly emerging and going to be a prevalent topic for many people, not just that are involved in data, but in all parts of the organization. So this is what I see when it comes to organizations that are looking at the AI governance framework, I would say. So I think Fiona mentioned earlier, there are different parts of building a model, certainly in terms of the data preparation side, the detection and monitoring side, as well as the overall governance of it. And what we saw last year in the US, certainly with the Federal Trade Commission, they saw an opportunity to leverage one of the powerful levers that they have across enterprises, is to enforce model deletion. And there's another term called algorithmic disengorgement, and that is, we've seen that in the case of Amazon, and last month, actually December 2023, with Rite Aid, which is a pharmaceutical chain in the US, where we saw that they were collecting surveillance data and making assumptions on the consumers on the probability of their behaviors within the stores. And this is where organizations that are collecting additional private and sensitive data don't have the right controls in place in terms of security and in terms of privacy. So what is a result of this act was for Rite Aid was to delete all the underlying data for their data products. And in this case, data products includes their AI algorithms and all the predictive data that came with all the data that they were collecting. So one of the things that organizations have to be more aware of is, one, to have a complete inventory of all their algorithms, AI algorithms and models, and two is to be more aware and cognizant and avoid bias in terms of all the AI models that they're creating. So this is a really important point in terms of the data that organizations are collecting and having the proper usage. And that falls into line in terms of data model preparation and knowing exactly what's potential sensitive data that's actually occurring. And last but not least, in terms of being able to approve data that's being used in models. And this is actually something I read recently in Silicon Valley. Menlo Securities report actually reported that the AI impact on security posture found that 55% of users are still inputting private identifiable information into prompt engineers like ChatGPT. They are still openly copying and pasting confidential documents and files into these chatbots. And those types of behaviors are very concerning, especially from a security breach, security leakage perspective. So what organizations are doing, certainly not just increasing their security policies, but also actually implementing physical controls into how their employees can be inputting and sharing data into either their internal chatbots or even external ones that they have implemented inside their organizations. So we're going to be seeing more of these types of behaviors and organizational changes from the security side of the organizations in order to ensure better and proper safe usage of AI.
That's a really good point. I think that those sorts of guardrails to be able to actually to ensure that employees aren't acting, sort of going off the reservation when it comes to in terms of their behaviours. This is a completely, uncharted territory for an awful lot of people, and we do have to kind of establish policies and procedures that fit in line with the rest of our governance policies. So no, I think you're totally right. And Fiona, just to turn to you then, in terms of the role of data and data quality in AI, I know you have a few points that you wanted to get across in terms of our conversation today as well.
Yes, Matt, and thanks for that, Peggy. I'm going to maybe pick up on a couple of those comments that you made there. But I really wanted to shine a light on the role of data in AI, because that's our red thread, across the whole process, and that's from actually inputting the data which is used by models right through to monitoring those models once they're in production. So the area that we work in with our clients is to ensure data quality as part of a client's data ecosystem, and we play one part in that. So organizations, enterprises are already at the stage where they have data within their enterprise, and it's used for downstream processes such as analytics and so on. And they can start leveraging their current data stack for more advanced analytics and AI and machine learning. So the first area that I've highlighted there is that the management of data and the complexity of that. And that's in terms of managing diverse data. So we've touched on things like, you know, databases and so on, but we've also got quite a lot of maybe streaming real-time data coming in, unstructured data and so on. So the first one is like the challenge of, you know, the technical challenge of managing all of that, integrating it together, making sure that it's correct. Addressing and identifying things such as biases that Peggy has highlighted, and that it adheres to regulations and the changing dynamic data landscapes that we have as well. So although data management, it focuses on data, it also is encompassed of what Peggy has talked to in terms of that governance, regulation. We'll be talking a bit later on about that shifting regulation and what that means. It also covers, you know, security as well. So role-based access to this data. We talked about PII data and sensitive data. And having that security controls around that, so we're not passing sensitive, confidential information into these models, and that, you know, there's good guardrails around this data and how and why the data is actually being used, and having different like zones for data and so on as well. So that's, you know, the first part of the puzzle, which is one of the trickiest parts to get right. And then the other areas that I wanted to address is as we progress through the ML journey, that quality assurance is embedded across the way. So data is a lot of fun. It can chop and change as it moves along a system. So things like your lineage, your checks on your DQ as it progresses. So you are identifying things like data drift or, you know, anomalies in your data, which could have an impact on the area that you're making predictions in. And then my favorite one is monitoring then in production. And I know we'll be talking about metrics later as well. And it is important to keep an eye on your predictive performance of your classifier, for example. But it's also really important to keep an eye on your data, making sure that that's not changing or deviating from the data that the model was changed on as well.
It's a really good summary, and I think both of those two perspectives explain an awful lot of the sort of the problem areas, and equally sort of the concerns or things that need to be addressed. And one of my favourite ways of starting a question that relates to what we then do about that is how. You know, and I know both of you are actively involved in the how, the actual implementation of resolving some of these thorny issues. So I'm going to come to Peggy first on this question, if that's okay, which is, how do we define and measure the trustworthiness and reliability of data in AI model creation, especially with unstructured data sets?
This is really the heart of it, right, Matt? The trustworthiness and reliability of data. But for many of those, you know, who've been working in data, either model risk management or analytics or business intelligence, for me, it goes back to the foundations, right? The data quality dimensions that I've always studied, and when I looked at the DAMA handbooks, the completeness, the validity scores, accuracy, fit for purpose, specifically for the AI algorithm that it's built for. And when I look at things like trustworthiness, that was already very important when we were building dashboards and business intelligence reports and things like that. So the trustworthiness, you know, really looks at the data value itself, and then also the sourcing of that information. Do you trust the source of where that data came from? Was it the original author, or is the source a third-party source, right? So that it contributes to the trustworthiness and the reliability of that data, whether it should be used in the AI algorithms. Last but not least, it's certainly the freshness of the data, the how when was the latest update, so that freshness of the data is also important. You don't, even though you may trust a source, it may have been produced, months ago, so it may not be as accurate as it should be. So interesting enough, when it comes to AI and specifically generative AI, unstructured data is the new wealth of information. It's actually the differentiator for organizations that are building the large language models, because unstructured data is an untapped source of competitive and differentiating information. And so, interestingly enough, when I have conversations with my customers on the large language models that they're building, and it's based on directly their unstructured data, which is currently predominantly a lot of their technical or product documentation, data quality is less of a concern. And I find that very interesting. I mean, I can see both sides of it, right? Because they trust the documentation that exists inside the organization. They trust all those unstructured documents. But there's one big part of the data lifecycle management that I think organizations are overlooking. And that's the fact that in a data lifecycle management process, there's a deletion and there's a retention process that happens at the end. So organizations that are blindly or inadvertently just pointing their large language models at their file shares, for example, they may be overlooking the fact that there are too many duplicates of outdated or expired files, which can potentially overweight the outputs of the AI algorithms so that it negatively impacts the results. So we see that data retention is going to be still a very important aspect of AI lifecycle management, because it ensures that the accurate balance of the information that's going to be a model output. So in general, unstructured data is really hard to govern, period. But in a generative AI perspective, the complexity is larger because of the unknown of not knowing exactly what is inside the contents of each of the unstructured files. So this is where a lot of the traditional machine learning classification to automatically tag and label not just the file types, but also understand what exactly contents are inside these file types. So this also goes back to the privacy and security aspect of ensuring that these unstructured data files are not inadvertently revealing your company IP information or your customer account numbers or your employee sensitive information. So these are all aspects of data governance and that needs to apply to unstructured data, and it becomes even more relevant if you're not doing that properly. Those mistakes will be enhanced even larger in the generative AI space.
Yeah, I get that, and I think because we've been talking quite a lot recently about unstructured data anyway, and having conversations with customers about exactly that point, Peggy, where you're saying, well, look, there's this untapped mine of information, and at the same point, what protections have I got in place that it's not just going to skew this, and there's going to be completely unintentional bias thrown into the mix. That's a really good point, Fiona. I particularly on that point, I think, because we've been on a couple of these calls together. What would you add in the context of this question when it comes to that sort of reliability of data that's going into AI models, but particularly from unstructured data?
Yeah. So I was going to start off with this, Matt, and say that this actually encompasses both, I'm going to call them traditional ML models now. So it feels strange calling them that. So things like your regression models and your neural networks and so on, and then your newer LLM models that we're seeing come out. I think it encompasses all of these areas. And I'll go back to what I'd said in the previous slide is that if we can review this across the whole ML ops journey, because your reliability and trustworthiness needs to remain constant as you go through this journey, from the usage of your data to actually train and test your models, right through to your deployment in production, where you need to monitor the performance of the model in terms of concept and data drift. And what we'd talked about before is like really focusing on the beginning of the process, which is your data architecture, and this really defines then your structure, your organization, and the flow of your data throughout your ML analytics system. And Peggy's already touched on this, so that's identifying your input data sources, cataloging that, employing data pipelines, ensuring that you have a steady flux of high quality data, your data cleansing, feature engineering, storage solutions, and so on, all of which is wrapped up in your governance and compliance. And these all start to begin to address that question of then measuring your trustworthiness and your reliability. And it also includes things like, your privacy measures, your access controls, your compliance with standards, that you have policies in place to govern your data usage, you prevent unauthorized access and safeguard your sensitive information. So that kind of sets, the landscape of this. And then if we go back to the ask of the question is like, well, what can we do to actually measure and track this? So what we have been using, understanding your data provenance, your lineage tracking is obviously very important. Implementing your quality assessment metrics, and I'm sure everybody on the call here is all familiar with accuracy and timeliness and completeness and so on. But what Peggy had alluded to as well is that this is slightly trickier for unstructured data, so for unstructured data, whether that be a document or an image or a video or audio file, accuracy could be, how do I know that this is factual and correct? It could be things like evaluating, the clarity of an audio file. Does that add to its accuracy metric? So it's really, tightening. It seems to be more defined metrics, quality metrics for structured data than unstructured data, but we'll see that grow and mature. We touched on timeliness there, so some of the metadata around these sources is making sure that it's up to date. You might have duplications, Peggy had said, like 50 of the same document, and maybe using the most up-to-date version as the one, and removing the rest, and checks on completeness. So having to crack open your unstructured document, for example, and ensure that you've got sentences and paragraphs, and that there's actually data in there. For a video or another type of unstructured data, I might be looking at frames that are in there. And back to what is quite prevalent for structured data is what's the relevance of this data source, and bias detection there as well. So detecting maybe distribution skews in the data, detecting maybe underrepresentation of a certain class that you're maybe trying to classify with, or maybe overrepresentation of other features. So this is us beginning to start to put a bit of flesh around how we can actually measure and track this. And then there's also your legal and your ethical compliance as well. So can I use this data? Does it comply to regulations? Perhaps you even want to validate what you've done against an external data source as well. And this just isn't done at the start of the process. That this needs to be tracked and monitored as we move through the ML ops cycle. So we're monitoring models and we're monitoring the data once they're in production as well, because that's really where the fun begins and degradation can occur. So I think the key messages are metrics to actually measure, the quality of unstructured data. And the overall summary is really having that as part of the whole ML ops process as well.
Yeah, I think from that perspective, you're looking at all of the really good disciplines and good business practices, which sort of pick up from what we talked about in the last webinar. We were essentially kind of coming in and saying, look, nothing's new here. Okay, some of the applications of technology might be new, but the principles are still the same. It's still the same approach that we need to take responsibly as the data management world. And I guess where this feeds into the next question is, but what are we also compelled to do? Like, what must we do? So as well as good business practices and things that we know that we absolutely have to do, go back to your absolute origins. What are those implications of current and upcoming regulations on data privacy and security? And then how should organizations adapt their data strategies accordingly? So I'll come to you first, Fiona, on this, because I know that you've had some involvement with Bank of England AI Forum in the past. And if I ask you this, and then we'll head to Peggy for a picture across the other side of the Atlantic.
Sure, I'll be keen to understand a bit more from the US side as well, Peggy. So I've maybe step back a little bit from this question, Matt, and we're looking at data privacy and security and the data strategy, and running alongside this is these new regulations that are coming out for AI. So the EU AI Act's been cooking and simmering for a number of years, and it's finally coming to the fore. And to really highlight that, we're still at that nascent stages of regulation, and because of this, and this is one of the outcomes of that AI forum with the Bank of England and the FCA was we're really keen to implement ML models, but we're not quite sure. There's still that little bit of uncertainty around the upcoming regulations and what does that actually mean to me. And if you look at the EU regulations, it's all based on risk as well. So within a highly regulated area, then that risk impact would have pause to actually implementing your ML models. So I know last time that we talked a bit about the Act and the regulation and what it means. And the focus of the Act was really around the safety of these models, that there's transparency and that there's human oversight still within these models, that you don't have discrimination and bias, that your privacy is protected and your human rights are protected. So we've already covered that ground. So I think this calls more about, okay, what are the practical things then can we do as an organization? So if you're an organization maybe in a highly regulated area, perhaps one of the first things to do is to perform an impact assessment of your current AI ML tools, and start doing a risk assessment against those and putting those into, you know, the different categories there. I think the second one, which is really important, and it goes back to the ask of the question, Matt, in terms of that, the data and privacy and regulation side, is actually what's the gap between the current policies and regulations that we currently have and what these new requirements are. And then based on that, doing some risk analysis around your data. So for example, analysis of your data sets for biases, update of your data governance plans as well, especially around those new transparency requirements in terms of documentation that will be required, and perhaps even auditing. And then that all builds into your risk management. So developing and integrating your risk management frameworks and ensure that they align with this new regulation, and, you know, developing this code of conduct for your organization, so you have more of a smoother transition to the AI Act's requirements and perhaps other regulations that we'll see being published across the world. One of the key areas then is documentation, so that you know, applies to the transparency of the process, and it's also making sure that you've got, you know, your reporting mechanisms in place, you've got your appropriate policies and procedures. You may not be developing your own models, you may be buying in models as well, and to have you know, tools and processes around procurement. And I think one of the key areas is then training across an organization as well, so that you ensure that, you know, senior level and employees all stay on top of, you know, the risks and follow the procedures to really promote the use of this fair and safe and ethical use of AI, and that this is all an iterative process as well. And we do have the, you know, the AI Act there, but we also got some lovely, nice technical standards and guidance that are coming out from other organisations such as the ISO and SEN as well, and NIST risk management framework, and all of these together, you know, will help bridge that gap between legal requirements on this side and then the actual technical machine learning approaches that we're building out.
No, that's really important, and I can providing that kind of practical way to actually implement risk things in production. And so I guess I'm saying to a question to you, Peggy, but thinking about it from your perspective, particularly given that BigID is massive in privacy and security. What are the impacts for you, and what are you seeing in relation to this question and data strategy involvement?
No, this is a great question, because certainly in the US, we see things a little bit more fragmented in terms of the, I wish the US doesn't have a federal privacy policy, nor do we have a more of a national AI Act, similar to what the EU Act is looking like. So with that said, though, I mean, certainly a lot of the AI provisions are actually being embedded in US state privacy laws, and we have about 10 states already that already have requirements for automated decision making and AI provisions around it. And coming up in 2024 and 2025, we see even more states proposing additional duty of care in Vermont, for example, on the AI developers, on how they're developing the AI systems to avoid the algorithmic discrimination that we're seeing, and as well as providing more disclosure requirements. We also see that in Virginia, that's being proposed as well, where the developers have to have these disclosure requirements, but also have a standard operating standard for providing a reasonable care to the end users. So this is where we're seeing certainly more states, and California certainly leading the way when it comes to these AI provisions. I think that Fiona did a fantastic job already talking about some of the data strategies. So I won't, summarize that at all, but I also just want to add, though, in terms of the data strategy is going to have to expand beyond the normal types of data that's being collected already. And this is where a lot of the AI algorithmic models are collecting information that is ungoverned or unstructured data. We're talking about biometric data, genetic data, a lot of consumer health data. These are not standard data types or data structures that organizations are used to handling. So I would just say that organizations need to expand the way that they're governing and processing this information. It's because it's going to fall under a lot of these state privacy bills in which they're expanding the definition of sensitive data. For example, in Colorado, sensitive data includes biological data and neural data. So what does it exactly mean? Obviously, a lot of companies need to be able to interpret and align these definitions to actual data itself. So this is where really working with your legal and compliance teams to really ensure that any type of biometric data, for example, is categorized and is governed properly with your classifications, and exactly where that fits into your different AI models and AI algorithms. So this is certainly a changing space, and I think a lot of expansion needs to happen in terms of your existing data strategies, and that's why it's so exciting, because of all these changing regulations.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point there, because if I think about how many companies in the EU sort of collectively lost their minds when it came to GDPR, and suddenly thought, oh, how on earth have we been managing consents? And so they just went out to try and see could they get more consent from people, which I can understand why their heads went that way, but equally it just exposed the fact that they had no real handle on a proper consent management policy, which should fit in under a data governance strategy. And that was just consent management around personal data sharing. Whereas this relates to absolutely everything where an AI model could be used in any industry, in any context. So it is so much bigger. I'm going to keep with you, Peggy, if that's okay, on the next question. And it's on trust, the really popular one from earlier on. But I do think it's worth us having a look at, because we dug into this bit earlier on. But so in light of the increasing sophistication of AI technologies, how can organizations implement a trustworthiness score based on observability into their data management practices? So yeah, wrestle with that one.
No, so I'll keep my response short, because I know we still have a lot more to cover. But so this question was really interesting, because I don't think it's how, but definitely organizations should implement a trustworthiness score. And the way I think about it is, how can consumers have an objective way to really get transparency into the model algorithms that organizations are creating? And if I were to build this, I've seen organizations build this internally, and I've seen different vendors offer this as a product. It's almost like an algorithm on top of an algorithm, right? Because of the streaming live nature of a lot of these, a lot of the data inputs for these models. This trustworthiness score, should incorporate the components of, the data quality components, dimensions that we talked about earlier, as well as, some of the ethical practices that's really important for responsible data. And so I think that organizations will need to reveal the components of what goes into their score or their fairness indicator, right? So I think that this will be something that potentially could be standardized across different industries or across the board as well. So, you know, I think as organizations are still getting their arms around building their AI algorithms and avoiding, you know, things like bias and discrimination, I think this will be something that can provide more trust for the consumers as well. So.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I like the way that you sort of positioned that as should, not necessarily how, but should they? And I guess extending that then, Fiona, to you. I mean, just for a comment on this, and then we'll get into our last question before we get to Q&A. But similarly, Fiona, you know, whether it's how or should, what's your perspective on the concept of a trustworthiness score in any of these aspects?
I think it really builds from what we had already discussed in question one. You know, the how you actually measure this and put this together. And I know we talked about things like, you know, focusing on your critical data elements and, you know, using a combination of different measures to actually produce a confidence score or a trustworthiness score. And I suppose really just to like finish off this question, because I know we're really keen to get on to the last one, is, you know, focusing then more on the monitoring of these scores, that they are reported to, you know, the correct users and consumers of that data, and that is produced in, you know, in a really simple, user-friendly manner.
Very good. Yeah, and you're right. And I realise we've trailed this question, so people are going to be like completely stoked to see what it is. But I'm gonna throw to you, Peggy, on this one, because I know that you're aware of the driver behind it. So the question is, if you were advising a new chief AI officer, for example, what should their first 100 days include? And maybe you can give some background as to why we've asked this question around a chief AI officer.
Well, there's several reasons. Certainly in the US, our executive order mandates that all federal agencies hire a chief AI officer. But certainly across, I think increasingly roughly 20% of organizations now have a chief AI officer. I see this as a chief data and AI officer. So certainly I advocate for all existing chief data officers of any organizations like myself to also have the title of AI attached to it. And the reason why I say that is because of the way that data is used across the organization. There's such a strong AI component, and the collaborative nature of the chief data officer naturally makes them also a best fit, best candidate for your organization's next chief data and AI officer role. So that is my pitch. But to answer this question though, Matt, I actually was thinking about this last night, and I wrote down 9 things I would advise a new chief data officer. So I will quickly run through them. And actually, Fiona, I think you read my mind, because some of these you also mentioned previously. So I'll just go through them really quickly. 1, as Fiona said, conduct an AI maturity assessment of the company, especially if you are new to the organization. It's really important to know exactly where and what AI applications are already being done today. So and what the maturity level in terms of the people, the process, and technology is really important. So that goes into number 2, is to really understand your organization and team's usage and applications of AI today. Having that inventory and that knowledge of the current state is really important in order to build your roadmap within the first 100 days. Number 3, similar to any new officer entering the organization, is really being able to talk to your different stakeholders. It's in the business, in compliance, in legal, technology. Really understand where AI can help your businesses be more efficient, and understand really where the immediate benefits of AI can take place. Number 4 is really focus on the business use cases that can create business value. And I've seen a lot of chief data officers really create a matrix that is horizontally it's effort and vertically is the impact, and really map out what those different business use cases are in terms of effort and impact, and then prioritize your existing resources in order to figure out where you're going to start with those use cases in AI that will make the most impact in the organization. So number 5 is being able to start out small. I think really pushing for an AI pilot that will have a full end-to-end impact in your organization, and then learn how that can scale to other businesses. So I think that each organization has really different culture in terms of how they implement and roll out technology. So being able to start with a pilot and figuring out how to scale faster is really important. Number 6, I would say, is work with stakeholders across different business units and functions. And I've seen many organizations do that today with creating a AI council, or they call this an AI governance council. And usually that has different representatives from either the governance team, the privacy team, compliance team, business team, technology team, having this cross-functional team to help not just weigh in and prioritize business units, but also ensures the right resources are going into your AI pilots and initiatives. Number 7 is don't reinvent the wheel. And I say this is important because there are so many existing processes that occur today within your organization that probably have been doing analytics, machine learning, data engineering. Those are the core fundamentals to your AI business. So being able to leverage and tack on your AI projects to those processes, I think is going to help make things accelerate faster. And in addition to, organizations already doing machine learning, potentially could already be doing model risk management as well, which is a key foundation factor as well. Number 8 is to reorganize your people, and I've seen that happen today in terms of cross-functional teams that includes not just technology and business, but data and privacy security to support and form under your AI council to support faster implementation. Okay, last but not least, the most important one that I've observed from talking to different companies is to create the wheel, right? For everyone today, AI is a new business, right? So there's no best practices because everyone is learning this, everybody is figuring it out all at the same time. So this is the most exciting time for all of us because there's no technology that has been this widespread and this transformative across the entire organization. So it's no longer just a compliance function or IT function. So there's no best practices. So it's really why it's so exciting for this new function, Chief AI Officer, to be able to create and build these new standards across the board and really be collaborative and go beyond just data, go beyond security and privacy, and really be, I would say, the most transformative chief officer in the business today. So those are my practical tips.
They're really, really comprehensive. I appreciate it. And I think what we'll definitely be doing after this, there'll be the blog, but now I'm also envisaging the infographic with the 9 steps. So that's fantastic. What would you add, Fiona, as we get close to wrapping this up?
Yeah, I'm so glad Peggy went first there. I'm essentially replicating what Peggy is saying, but not quite as well. So yeah, if I was advising a new chief AI officer, or if I was advising, a chief data officer going into the role of chief data officer and AI officer, I think the first thing is to pause, and I'm sure you want to just roll up your sleeves and get stuck into that strategy and vision, but to firstly take time to listen to your stakeholders across the company, whether that's your data scientists, your IT department, your executives, and to really understand what are their priorities and what are their expectations for AI in the company. As Peggy's already said, to do an audit within the company, what skills currently exist there, how mature is your data management system, what tools do you have, what stack do you use, to brush yourself up on the new AI laws and regulation and understand the governance that you currently have within the organisation. And then go off and set to work on that vision and strategy, but making sure that it aligns with the goals and priorities of the organisation. So AI is a lovely, spangly new technology. Access to it, the bar of adoption has been lowered, but we can't forget that it should, align with the business objectives of the company and understand the value that it brings. And as Peggy says, start small, get some quick wins underneath you, and then also have your longer term strategic projects that you're working along. And to remember, this is iterative, it's brand new, we're all learning. We need to review and adapt along the way. We need to keep our stakeholders engaged, be transparent, communicate, and that's I've got to keep that quite short with the time that we've got left now. Matt.
No, you're very good. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Peggy, on that. So what we've got, as you say, with the time that we've got left, you have the opportunity, each of you, to be able to say, well, alongside all of this, what are we currently doing as companies? What are BigID, what are Datactics doing as companies in this space? So Peggy, I'll hand to you first, just to give us a bit of an understanding, a high-level overview on BigID solution for AI security.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Matt. And I feel like we extended this webinar extra 15 minutes, and we still need probably another half hour to cover all these topics, because I know Fiona and I we probably abbreviated a lot of our comments. But anyway, so at BigID today, a lot of the conversations we have is not just with security, but it's also with privacy and data personas. And what we advocate for is certainly the concept of statefulness in terms of continuous monitoring and understanding of the inventory of your data, and being able to understand where your security risk exposure is, and potentially your privacy risks as well. And how do you do that without having, a lot of the talks about being able to understand your data is really still manual today in terms of creating this inventory and cataloging it. We want to advocate AI machine learning in order to build and automate this type of discovery and cataloging, and the automatic identification of potential risk in terms of where your sensitive data is and where it shouldn't be, in terms of your AI algorithms, in terms of your business applications today. So this slide really, just talks about in terms of how different policies and identification of the data will make you compliant with the changing regulations. You have to have a defensive posture in terms of all these changing regulations. And the best way to do it is to build a solid foundation around security, privacy, and governance. Pass it over to Fiona.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and I nicked your format for Fiona just to make it consistent for the audience. So similarly, Fiona, go for it.
Oh, you're on mute. You just need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought we were past that at this stage, but obviously not.
Just bring it back in, just for fun.
So yeah, Datactics, our bread and butter is data quality, and the message that we've been articulating across this webinar has been that your data and the quality of that data needs to be monitored and measured across the life cycle of your machine learning journey. So making sure that your data is model ready to actually input to these models models. Lots of the lovely work around engineering features, integrating data sources together, cleansing, pre-processing data. Focus on the data quality. So Peggy talked about automation, so having that orchestration of your data quality, so you don't have these fragile data pipelines. We'll focus on the no-code environment as well, which touches on the barrier to adoption of these technologies has been greatly reduced. And then focus on, your diverse data quality checks, error checks, and so on. And then just finishing with the, once your model is in production and the insights on that. So the monitoring of that in production, having, your diverse metrics, whether that is on the performance of the model itself, the performance of the data, even the performance of the machine that it's running on. That transparency and reporting that we're going to need for these regulations coming through. And I finished off with this role-based dashboard. So being able to, report on this in real time and having access to that data depending on your role within an organisation.
It's very succinct. Thank you. I'm going to skip through the next slide because it says open questions and answers. What I'm going to say, and we didn't have any additional ones, which is fantastic. If there were, we would have come up with an entire extra webinar, which we may yet do. You never know. If you want to get in touch with Peggy or Fiona or both, you can see their details here. Peggy, you're speaking fairly soon at Gartner's Orlando Summit, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I'll be there next month. For anyone in Orlando, feel free to come by my booth or talk to me about the role of the Chief Data and AI Officer.
Which will be, we're expecting you to update on LinkedIn after this as soon as possible. Meanwhile, I'm going to do the same thing to Fiona's LinkedIn profile. I'll get her to do it anyway. And Fiona, I'm going to get you on a panel sometime soon as well. You can rest it assured. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peggy and Fiona in particular, for your contributions today, and for everybody for dialing in. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll, as I say, we'll be back with blogs, infographics, and everything you can possibly imagine in the not too distant future. So until then, see you again and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.